Hello, this is the boxing profile for George LeBlanc from Canada. His birth year is 1856. He was born December 17th. His bio: George LeBlanc was a late bloomer, starting at the age of 27. He had a very short prime and he remained very untested. His fighting style was a crude, tough guy. His competitive rounds were 48, very low. My score for him would be 6. His chief nemesis: he was very close to Jack Dempsey Leopold in rankings, the original Jack Dempsey. He had 2 fights with Jack Dempsey NP, including winning a 32-round battle. His greatest achievement is the 32-round win over Jack Dempsey NP. The simulation results go as follows. LeBlanc was far more competitive than a lot of other boxers who didn't make the cut here, as he is the beginning of the last in the tournament. His best simulation wins, including a win over John L. Sullivan and a win over Twin Sullivan. His biggest miss of his career is a 1886 match that John L. Sullivan fought. In this miss, you would substitute Harold for George LeBlanc in the 1886 match, which would feature the 33-year-old LeBlanc versus a 28-year-old John L. Sullivan. The simulation certainly shows that he was capable of competing with Sullivan, but Sullivan avoided almost all of his elders completely, which included the white George LeBlanc, the black George Godfrey, and the white Bill Varnon from Australia. Now we would talk about LeBlanc's rise to fame. LeBlanc fought heavyweights for one good reason, and an obvious reason. Heavyweights made the most money of any weight class in the sport. Economically, the risk made sense to LeBlanc. Unfortunately, the McCoy match turned out to be a disappointment for LeBlanc, as it was declared a draw after 8 bruising rounds. As often happens in the bizarre world of boxing, the draw with McCoy provided to be a real boom to LeBlanc's career. It gained him a new legion of fans, more notoriety in the press, and numerous offers from financial backers to set up a fight between LeBlanc and a future boxing immortal, the original Leopold Jack Dempsey, universally regarded then as the middleweight world champion. In fact, Dempsey was held in such high esteem by both fans and reporters, he was often referred to as the best fighter in the world. Born in Ireland, December 15th, 1862, Dempsey migrated to New York, where his family lived, where he worked and found jobs as a laborer. In 1884, Dempsey knocked out George James to capture the world middleweight crown. Although overseas, he was regarded as only the American middleweight champion. Truth be told, he was probably the best middleweight fighter in the world at the time. Dempsey gave LeBlanc a crack at his middleweight title because he didn't consider LeBlanc to be a very credible fighter. Dempsey sat ringside for LeBlanc's fight with Peter McCoy, and Dempsey surmised that if LeBlanc couldn't stop McCoy, a fighter he greatly outweighed, then LeBlanc was not a bona fide threat to defeat him and capture the middleweight title. On Sunday, March 14th, 1886, at Long Island, LeBlanc and Jack Dempsey, 2 fierce combatants who loathed each other, fought for a record amount then for the middleweights of $1,000 each, plus a mutually agreed upon side bet of $500 per fighter. LeBlanc, the fighting Marine from Canada, stood toe-to-toe with Dempsey, giving it as good as he got before succumbing in the 13th round. The fight lasted 49 minutes and 45 seconds and was an all-out war, both men feeling sore and beat up for many weeks after the fight. Truth be told, the match with Jack Dempsey, which happened in 1886, his very first fight, the 13-round loss, actually nearly killed LeBlanc, as he suffered great blood loss in the fight and became near faint at various levels of the match, but he persisted on with just superhuman power to try and finish the match, and his energy levels just decreased round after round as his blood loss continued to get worse and worse, and the match, almost nearly killed him. Even so amazing that the George LeBlanc came out in the last round, the 13th round, barely half alive. At the very end of his rope, and suffered a brutal knockdown because he was barely able to stand. And just a very heroic effort by George LeBlanc. Now, in my scoring system, this fight awarded him 2 points for a championship level loss. George LeBlanc's next fight of note happened 3 years after the Jack Dempsey fight. This is in 1889. At this point, he is 33 years old, still a little bit in his prime. His prime was relatively short, and he was fighting the new up-and-comer Denver Ed Smith, who was 25-1, and dramatically much younger than him. Denver Ed Smith was one of the few fighters that actually started pretty young in his career, so he had youth on his side fighting much older elders, as George LeBlanc was at 33 years old. This fight ended in a 2-round draw, but as you'll find out just by looking at boxing records and boxing rec in general, there's no mention and no circumstances that you can extract from looking at the fight log, so that's why we need to dig a little bit deeper, which is what we're going to do here. So after a cautious first round with Denver Ed Smith, this is how the second round proceeded. When time was called, the Marine's right side showed where Smith's left had visited, and after a little sparring, Smith opened up hostilities by leading with a short left with his left hand. Then the Marine made a rush, and Smith's straight left landed on his jaw and jolted him back 5 feet. LeBlanc quickly forced Smith to dodge a vicious uppercut and a left swing. Then each swung his right and landed on the head. Smith retreated to near the ropes. LeBlanc followed him. Smith stopped suddenly and in a flash planted his right full on the Marine's neck. LeBlanc reeled backwards and then fell forward on his breast to the floor. He got up in a few seconds, but was still in a dazed condition. He was no sooner on his feet than Smith rushed him across the ring to the ropes and proceeded to batter him with his lefts and rights when the police interfered. To all appearances, the Marine was beaten, and it was doubtful that he could have lasted the round out. The contest was declared a draw, and the majority of the spectators declared that Smith had practically won before the fight even began. It was agreed upon that neither fighter was knocked out at the end of the 15 rounds, and the result should be declared a draw, as the crowd left in disgust at the horrible police interference, and they were outraged. LeBlanc's next match of note was his greatest match, is a 32-round win over the middleweight champion Jack Dempsey later that summer in the year 1889. At this point, LeBlanc was still 33 years old and not that far removed from his match with Denver Ed Smith. I'm sure Dempsey viewed him as easy competition at the time of the match. So the headline of the second match with Jack Dempsey goes as follows. Jack Dempsey knocked out by LeBlanc after his man was whipped. A game fight in which the Marine proved that he can stand very much punishment. 32 rounds battling in which each man proved his mettle. Now we're going to advance to the last round so we can show how the fight ended according to the newspaper article. This is from the Independence Record, August 19th, 1889. The 31st round was exceedingly tame when the men came up for the 32nd round. Dempsey attempted to force matters. He was hit heavily on the face and blood spouted upon the floor of the ring when he fell. Intense excitement ensued, and Dempsey struggled bravely to rise. But before he had reached his feet, weak and staggering, the time had expired, and the referee awarded the fight to George LeBlanc. The sudden termination of the fight was a surprise to every man in the clubroom. A chance blow lost Dempsey the battle at the time when it seemed that the Marine had lost all his power. Shockingly, LeBlanc never fought Dempsey again. For some reason, the title wasn't on the line during this match, and LeBlanc did not win the middleweight crown. So this was August of 1889, his fight with Jack Dempsey. LeBlanc actually never really capitalized too much on this in his career. In 1890, the next year, he lost a 13-round disqualification against George Kessler, who didn't have much of a record at the time with just one win. And he lost because he kicked his man in the groin, as LeBlanc was a very rambunctious, almost semi-drunk sometimes participant in the matches. His next match, which was a few months later in the following year of 1891, was against young Mitchell, who was a little bit better fighter, and this was a loss of 12 rounds, and the bout was declared a fake, and all bets were off. And what happens in the time if you discover like a fake bout happens in your career, then your momentum for further matches is greatly diminished. And because the betting favorite, which is the public, no longer has confidence in you and in the situation at hand. Now, LeBlanc only had 2 more fights of note as far as championship caliber rounds go. And by championship caliber rounds, I mean a boxer that would be ranked in the tournament here. So at least a C-level fighter, and not counting any of these D-level fighters that the fighter fought. So in 1892, he had 2 fights with the black, crafty Texan Frank Childs. At this point, LeBlanc was quite a bit older and quite a bit meaner and considerably more drunk. At the age of 36, he fought his 2 matches with Frank Childs, and we're going to look at each of those quickly. These are George LeBlanc's last 2 matches of note. This was his first match with Frank Childs. This is from the newspaper account, February 19th, 1892. The headline: Fistic sensation. George LeBlanc knocked out in 3 rounds. William Childs, a colored man of Los Angeles, does it. Okay. Hot from the start, there was no loss of time, and both men got to work without the usual preliminaries. It was apparent from the start that Childs was no chopping block for the conqueror of Dempsey, and it was evident that it was not going to be any tame affair. Childs had a long reach. His position is anything but graceful. In fact, William Childs can be called an awkward fighter without any degree of exaggeration. He sticks out his left in a most peculiar manner. But the Los Angeles pugilist, who last night leaped from obscurity to worldwide prominence, is quick and can hit like a sledgehammer. LeBlanc forced matters, but he received as good as he gave, and the excitement reached a fever heat when Childs sent the Marine through the ropes and onto the floor. The color man repeated the operation soon after, and the crowd yelled and cheered for seconds. And it was a hammer and tong for the balance of the last of the first round. Both men were tired when time was called. Everyone began to talk, and there was more bottled-up excitement to the square foot than anyone had ever known before in the city of Los Angeles. The second round opened with both men cautious. LeBlanc tried several swings, but the Los Angeles man displayed considerable activity in dodging them. The colored man got home with several swings, but it was a trifle overcautious, apparently doubting his own ability to hold his own with the world-famed opponent. LeBlanc was more careful than the preceding round and did not give his able antagonist so many chances. The round ended with honors fairly even. The beginning of the third round, LeBlanc knocked out. The third round was highly sensational, and one of the greatest coups ever known in the history of American pugilism occurred. Childs set sail for LeBlanc as soon as time was called in the third round, and LeBlanc appeared to be at sea, and try as he could, he was unable to land effectively on Childs. This gave the colored man renewed confidence, and he set LeBlanc down with a heavy swing. LeBlanc was down several seconds and came up groggy. Childs forced matters, and the excitement was terrific. LeBlanc was perfectly at the mercy of the colored man, and well-directed blows from the French-Canadian sent the French-Canadian down to the floor. He fell with great force and laid there like a log. 10 seconds were called off, and still the Marine lay there dead to the world. His seconds carried him through the ropes and into the dressing room, and it was several moments before LeBlanc regained consciousness. LeBlanc's last fight of note was his rematch with Frank Childs. This happened relatively quickly, just a mere 30 days after his first fight, March 24th, 1892. And again, LeBlanc was quite a bit older than Frank Childs. That is, he was 36 years old, and one of the earliest known birth years in this tournament here. So he was certainly the senior to Frank Childs. And at this point in time, Frank Childs is described in the newspaper as William Childs. So hence the confusion. It's still the same fighter. They just some fighters go through name alterations as their careers advance. Frank Childs, the second fight, which took place on March 25th, 1892. The Black won. LeBlanc, the Marine, meets as Waterloo. Defeated by Frank Childs after a hot contest of 8 rounds. Hard and furious fighting from start to finish. The white man outfought at every point. LeBlanc badly punished. George LeBlanc, the once famous Marine, has again suffered defeat at the hands of Frank Childs, the local colored middleweight, a comparatively green pugilist, whose sensational feat of knocking out the Marine in 3 rounds a few weeks ago was believed to be an accident. The fight, which took place in the gymnasium of the newly organized Pastime Athletic Club on North Main Street in this city of Los Angeles, was for the purse of $750 at catch weights. Fully 500 enthusiastic admirers of the art of defense witnessed the event, which was generally conceived to be one of the most interesting of its kind ever held in the city. And although it was somewhat marred by the viciousness displayed by LeBlanc at the finish, it will long be remembered in the annals of local pugilism that Childs proved himself a better man than his more renowned antagonist was proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. The time was called at 9:37 o'clock p.m. The first round. The men advanced cautiously to the center of the ring. Child's awkward style as they sparred for an opening created a great deal of merriment, as he appeared to be grabbing at the imaginary flies some 3 feet in front of him. Suddenly, however, though he went in for a rush and jabbing his opponent with his left in the jaw, clinched. After the breakaway, Childs again rushed and landed a half-arm swing on the Marine's ear with his right, but missing heavily with his left, swung and clinched again. A few seconds later, Childs again rushed in and landed heavily with both hands, receiving only one blow in the stomach in return, as the Marine went to his knees, remaining there for 6 seconds when the round closed. Childs was enthusiastically cheered as he went to his corner. Second round. Childs resumed hostility at the start, rushing in and landing with his right. During the clinch which followed, the Marine showed a disposition of mean, but the crowd hissed him. Childs landed a crushing right on the Marine's jaw and later retaliated with a terrible hot drive as he came again, and as Childs missed a left swing, Blanche downed him with a right swing on the jaw. The colored man was up again like a cat, rushing in, raining blow after blow on his opponent's face and neck, staggering him. The round closed with the men at close quarters and fighting desperately in the Marine's corner. Third round. LeBlanc's face began to show signs of punishment he had received, but Childs was as fresh as ever when they came up again. The latter rushed, landing a right and clinched. A hot exchange of right swings on the jaw was followed by a rush by LeBlanc, who landed on Childs' neck, staggering him. Just as the round closed, the latter rallied and again smashed the Marine with both hands repeatedly, getting away without a return. The start of the fourth round. Both men were somewhat distressed, but after 2 minutes sparring, LeBlanc rushed, swinging his right. Childs, however, was as quick as a flash in getting away, and as the Marine slacked up on his dusky antagonist, rushed in and biffed him time and again with both hands. At the call of the time, the Marine played groggy. Fifth round. Very little was done. There was a spirited exchange of hot swings at close quarters about the middle of the round, but both men lacked steam. Childs jabbed his left into his opponent's mouth at the end without return. Sixth round. Childs was fresher of the two when they came up. He landed his left on the Marine's nose and his right in his wind, getting away just in time to avoid a wicked swing. The Marine renewed his dirty tactics in this clinch which followed and was hissed. His opponent tried to get in again but was stopped with a terrible drive on the chin. He rallied, however, and, as before, rushed the Marine to the ropes and hammered him with both hands just as the call of the time. Seventh round. LeBlanc, who was evidently waiting for an opportunity to get in a knockout blow, failed to take advantage of the only really good opening afforded to him. As Child missed a vicious right swing and turned around like a top, George landed a hot left swing on his opponent's chin. However, soon afterwards, but the colored man rushed in and beating down the Marine's guard, smashed in with both hands until he tired. Both men were clinched at the time of the call of the 7th round. 8th round. Childs came up strong and fresh and started in with evidently intention of putting his man out. But LeBlanc clinched and adopted his foul tactics again. This order of business was kept up for over a minute, and it was merely a question of time when the Marine, as he seized to ward off his opponent's blows entirely, merely clinched to avoid punishment. Finally, LeBlanc, seeing that he was licked, claimed that Childs hit him on the shoulder and grabbed him around the waist and threw him down and kicked him. Childs, though severely hurt, jumped up quickly and grasping the Marine with his huge arms in a half Nelson lock. He suddenly jerked his opponents into the air and flung them several feet away. By this time, the ring was full of officers, however, and although the excitement was intense, referee Curran announced that he had decided to award the fight to Childs on a foul, a decision which was met with general satisfaction. And with that concluded the last of George LeBlanc's eventful fights of his career. Although he meandered on for a few years after this, none of his fights were real of importance. Most of the time he was showing up drunk. He was a full-on antagonist. He followed repeatedly, and he was no longer a draw. As the fighting Marine turned into an aloof drunk, intent on disobeying all the laws, as his skills greatly diminished after the age of 36, which is to be expected. An overview of LeBlanc. He was a very competitive fighter, I would say. He had limited skill, but there's no doubt about his heroism as he did everything he could to provide a good match for the spectators. And he very much had a determination that was of the highest ilk of any of the pugilists of his day.